Anybody who isn't confused by all this isn't thinking hard enough.
Do you want to talk at all about potential attempts to cancel you?
Okay. Well, I don't think I need to tell anybody listening to this podcast about ClimateGate. Everybody knows all about that. Well, my first steps into canceldom started with ClimateGate, and I posted an essay on Steve McIntyre's blog about how we needed to do better in the climate community, be more transparent, pay more attention to uncertainty, be more respectful of skeptical perspectives. I mean, this seemed like motherhood and apple pie, but I mean, I was the only scientist speaking out about these things, and everybody was quietly seething and wishing I would shut up. And I received emails that I should be more sensitive to the feelings of the scientists who had been caught out in ClimateGate. And I said, excuse me, I don't think so. So, I continued in this mode and writing more, making a stand on these things. And I started my blog in September of 2010, leading it off with a series on uncertainty monster. And I was really tackling all these uncomfortable issues. And the more the climate establishment began to seethe, the greater the interest was from outside the climate establishment, including academics from law, policy sciences, computer sciences, social sciences, science technology studies, social psychology. They said, oh, yeah, this is great. We love this. So I redefined my peer group away from that more establishment academic group. So people found me to be very inconvenient. In 2011, I think it was September 2011, about a year into my blog, I wrote a blog post called Hiding the Decline, which was my first foray into talking about the hockey stick controversy. And I focused specifically on that graphic, where they splice the instrumental record. I said, you can't do that. How did you think, all this kind of stuff. And I didn't really call out Michael Mann by name, but I just said, this is wrong. I was confused. This is misleading, on and on it goes. Apparently, Michael Mann was very displeased. And shortly thereafter, I became called a denier. And Michael Mann started tweeting and this whole, misinformer. And I showed up on Skeptical Sciences and DeSmog and all of these lists of, denier lists. And, it was coincident with Michael Mann's displeasure. And Michael Mann was a prominent person in calling me a denier until fairly recently. I think it was a 2017. We were both in the same congressional hearing, and he even called me like a climate denier in his written congressional testimony. Once he found out that I was involved on Mark Stein's behalf in that infamous lawsuit of Michael Mann versus the National Review, he stopped calling me a denier. I think he realized that this may not be very helpful for his case. But that was the beginning of the end. If you Googled my name, back in the day, 5-10 years ago, everything would be Judith Curry, serial climate disinformer, Judith Curry, climate denier. I mean, this is what would show up when you Googled me. So at Georgia Tech, my forays into public relations, if you will, were not particularly appreciated. I got no credit for my public outreach. They didn't particularly give me credit for my philosophy of science papers that I was getting published in peer-reviewed journals. Oh, it's not real science. What are you doing? And then when I started getting called climate denier, then, we don't want to be tarred with this brush. Okay, so it was very uncomfortable for me at Georgia Tech. So I saw the writing on the wall. I started to say, okay, well, why don't I look for somewhere else to go? And I really wanted to be out west, which is where my daughter and her family landed. So I was being headhunted for, a number of jobs, some big ones. And so I got some interviews, and the feedback I got from the headhunters that I looked great on paper, I interviewed great, I showed a lot of vision in writing my statement, but you're regarded as unhireable because of what appears when you Google Judith Curry, and there was all this denier, misinformer crap. So I was essentially made unhireable. I said, okay, well, I have a choice. I can sit in some closet office at Georgia Tech and suck up my big salary until they figure out some way to get rid of me, or I can just leave. So I left. I retired at the age of 63. It's rather premature for an academic, but I had started my company in 2006. And so I said, wow, this is a great opportunity. This is what I want to do anyways. I want to use weather and climate information to solve real problems, both real problems and imaginary problems engendered by policies. And so that's what I've been doing. And again, during COVID, I hunkered down and wrote my book. And now that that's finished, I'm back engaging more with the public and doing more interviews. And here I am.
Do you want to talk at all about your Jordan Peterson interview, either how that went or the response to it after?
Okay, well, so I started right after finishing the book, say about in October, I started saying, okay, well, I should really do interviews. So I'll be testifying in a couple of trials this year. And I also need to get used to answering questions and need to figure out how I'm going to talk about my book. So I started accepting invites to interviews. And I'll talk about a couple of interviews prior to the Jordan Peterson one that I thought were especially good for various reasons. One was a biz news reporter from South Africa who interviewed me. And it was sort of I forgot that I was being interviewed until like 5 minutes when I glanced, I got an email from her. Somehow it didn't land. I go, oh my gosh, 5 minutes, I'm getting set up. And I'm in a ratty t-shirt, my hair is sticking up like this. I mean, it was early in the morning. And so I sat down, I was just totally wired and, crazy. And the interview went semi-viral. It reached 500K viewers in a few days. She just let me talk. She'd ask these general questions, and I was very animated, and I was talking like crazy. And it really went. Once it hit 500K viewers, then it became shadow banned by both YouTube and Facebook. In the title of the interview, it was Dissident Climate Scientist Judith Curry. And they said, oops, we can't have this. So there seemed to be some trigger at 500,000 viewers. The other one that was good, this was with Power Hungry. And Robert Bryce is from the energy industry, and he's a very, very good interview. And he asked me a lot of, the other one, I was just able to talk. He asked me a lot of challenging, interesting questions, that really stretched me beyond what I would normally be talking about. Okay, then I did a number of other interviews, but the Jordan Peterson one was interesting. And I have to tell you a little bit about the experience. So, we set this up for 8 a.m. on whatever date it was. They wanted to do it 7 a.m. I said, no, 8 a.m. This gives me a chance to eat breakfast, get my head together and, calm down. So we agreed on 8 o'clock. And so then the day before the interview, they said, okay, the crew will arrive at 6 a.m. I go, what crew? What crew? Okay. So it was a crew of 6 people, and they're bringing in all sorts of equipment. You can't imagine the equipment. Totally moved all the furniture out of one of my rooms and did this. They were very nice, and they were, interacting with my dogs, and they were just lovely people. But I'm sitting there, what on earth? And then the makeup artist shows up. And then makeup. And so, And then I'm saying, and the lights, somebody commented that, she kept closing her eyes. Is she high on something? I just needed a break from the bright lights that were shining on me. And so now, ironically, my demeanor was very measured. I was like this. I think I was so burnt out and fried by the 2 hours prior to that. That's the demeanor I want for, when I'm testifying, and I don't always achieve that, rather than my normal, more animated kind of demeanor. So that was the setup. Okay, then we get to the interview. I have to confess, I have never listened to a Jordan Peterson podcast. Nothing personal about Jordan Peterson. I don't listen to podcasts because I read so fast. I just get my information by reading, not by listening. And I don't drive anywhere. It's a great thing to listen to when you're in the car, but I don't drive anywhere. So I just don't listen to podcasts. So I was taken aback by his interviewing style. He says, I tend to talk a lot, so just interrupt me, and then so when he's going, I'm not going to say, yoo-hoo, my turn. So I just sat there and nodded away. And after 5 minutes of going, I said, well, that's not quite right. He's smart, he's good, he's vivacious, but he went off on some of these tangents that were, somewhat misinformed. So that eated up a lot of time. But he brought out some interesting things. And, I think it turned out I got a lot of good feedback. People liked the podcast, even though I felt like it didn't turn out as well as those other two that I mentioned. It's gotten a lot of comments on YouTube, and I think almost 700,000 views at this point. So, that's pretty successful relative to any of my other interviews. But I didn't have a chance to mention the book. I hope I have another chance to go on Jordan Peterson to talk about the book. But I appreciate this interview, Tom, because it's the first time I've really talked a lot about the book. So I need to figure out, what is the story I want to tell about the book in an interview. And I hope the one that I told sort of makes sense. But I look forward to getting feedback, on this as I refine my presentation and my arguments on how to talk about the book.
That's great. This is a good place to practice that. But you literally didn't even mention it, though, on Jordan Peterson? No?
Okay. There's a second 30-minute one that's for subscribers only to some TV station. And I managed to get it in during that. But I don't think very many people saw that one. I think that might have been the best part of the interview, this 30-minute add-on for subscribers to some TV station or something. I can't remember the name of it, but yeah, I did get to mention it during that last 30 minutes.
You've given a lot of congressional testimony, right? Yeah. What is that like? What is your prep, or what's the whole situation with giving that?
Okay. Between 7 to 14 days before the hearing, you're contacted by a congressional staffer, and they're usually saying, oh, we're planning a hearing. We wanted to get some ideas from you about, what might be covered. And I give them some ideas. And then the next day they come back and say, oh, would you like to testify? And I, usually say yes. But you have to drop everything, with maybe 7 to 10 days warning, drop everything to write your written testimony, which is due 48 hours in advance. So it's a drop everything. And I love putting those together because you really have, distill things and communicate things and, what's really important, what's policy relevant. And I just love writing those written testimonies. I view it as a great opportunity. Note, today is the first. There's a Senate budget hearing that I was invited to attend. And I said I couldn't do it. I know we could have rescheduled this, but I had just traveled the weekend before. I'm in the middle of all this book stuff and submitting a big proposal. And, I just couldn't drop everything the last 2 weeks to put that together. And I've limited my travel quite a bit. I would have traveled for that, but all other things I couldn't do it. And I sort of feel bad because the topic was a good one for me. But what is it like? And then you have 5 minutes to make an oral statement. So you have to figure out how to make, this compelling. And then, I prefer House testimony to Senate testimony. The Senate testimony, all the senators are grandstanding. They don't ask you any meaningful questions. And if they ask questions, they're only puff pieces for the witnesses who are there for their party. So you never really get anything interesting going. The representatives, I guess, are less egotistical, at least some of them, and they ask real questions, and sometimes they'll ask questions not of their own, the witnesses for their own party. So that's sort of interesting. But, sometimes there's some pretty, I've been in 2 hearings with Michael Mann. But, it's a very interesting experience, and it's hard to make a point. The most fun hearing, and this was Ted Cruz's committee. I'm going to say it was like a science, space, and technology subcommittee. I don't remember exactly what it was. And it was data or dogma, about the scientific method and stuff like that. And I put together one that was really nice. And also invited was Mark Stein. Okay, and he was invited, not that he's a scientific expert, but that he had been caught, in the crossfire, if you will, in media. Okay, and Senator Waxman started going on criticizing me. You don't know what you're talking about, the consensus, yada, 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 yada. He didn't ask me a question. And then I said, I would like to respond. And then I started responding semi-effectively. And then Mark Stein piped in. Okay, and this was just absolutely classic. So this is on YouTube. It might have 1 million views. It's a hearing with me, Mark Stein, and Senator Markey. An absolute classic. So that was the high point of my congressional testimony experience, was that exchange with Mark Stein and Senator Markey.
Have you faced many hostile questions then during that testimony, or no?
Not so much, because it's really mostly, in the early days, like in 2007, I was invited by Democrats to testify twice, and this was about hurricanes and global warming. My most recent 10 testimonies were invited by the Republicans. Most of the questions that I get asked are invited by Republicans. So, it's not that tense, the actual questioning. There's more tension between the members themselves rather than with the witnesses. Okay. We're sort of collateral.
All right. Earlier today, we exchanged a couple of emails about your Wikipedia page and the battle over your Wikipedia page. Yeah. Now, as you can't participate in that on your own page, can you?
Oh, no, you can't. I mean, I don't know who put up my original Wikipedia post, but you can't do your own. It has to be somebody else, and only people with a public presence. You don't get posted there for having journal publications. You have to have media articles, interviews, something like that to get a Wikipedia page. And people add things, and then other people take them off and add them back, and they have all these fights. My Wikipedia page now isn't as weird as it has been in the past. It has been much weirder in the past. But you can go, and I'm not sure what button you push on Wikipedia, but you can look at all the changes and the discussion between people who are arguing about all these changes. And it is, I haven't looked at it recently, but maybe 5 years ago, somebody suggested I go look at this. And I was absolutely astonished. Absolutely astonished. I mean, there are a few people fighting the good fight to make this accurate. Other people think it's more important to cite, these people from SourceWatch or some of these crazy people who come up with crazy things, on my page. But she's discredited because this moron who nobody's ever heard of said this, and it's goofy. So Wikipedia about people who are controversial, you have to take that with a grain of salt.
Absolutely. I have a couple of quotes I just captured from today from your page. Michael Mann said, climate science would be stronger without you because of your Confucianism and denialism. So Confucianism, I haven't heard much about that. Is that a new quote? Have you heard that
goes back. Okay, Joe Romm. Okay, I don't know if you remember him.
I do. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, you have to go back. In the hurricanes and global warming era following Hurricane Katrina, Joe Romm thought I was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And, he would promote me on his Climate Progress blog or whatever it was. And, that I was just great. And, he had this inside track with me and, it was good. And so when the ClimateGate thing came along, it was shaken up a little bit. He posted a follow-up thing to the one I posted on climate audit. It was an open letter to graduate students about the integrity. He thought that we needed a counterpoint to posting something on climate audit. So he posted it. And then after that, I'm getting away from Judith Curry. A lot of people don't like her. So let's, let me undo this. And then I became, according to Joe Romm, the most debunked scientist on the planet, on it goes. But somewhere along the line, he started calling me Confucianist Judith Curry because I talked about uncertainty and all that kind of thing. And so, when you think about it, the Confucianist label is an interesting one. And in a way, it's apt. I mean, anybody who isn't confused by all this isn't thinking hard enough. So I'm okay with Confucianist.
Very good. Another funny quote out there about you, quote, she was included on an email sent by Fred Singer, end quote.
I know. Yeah, so many people send me emails. You can't imagine how many I'm on. People from out of nowhere send me emails, and to hold me culpable for somebody sending me emails when my email is publicly available, on the Georgia Tech website, and this is the kind of thing, like, come on. I'm guilty. I did get an email from Fred Singer.
So have you ever had any formal involvement with the IPCC?
Yes, I did. The third assessment report. I was a contributing author to Chapter 7, and I contributed some stuff on sea ice. I was also an expert reviewer for a couple of different chapters in the third assessment report. I remember one of them was on aerosols and climate, and I was quite critical of that chapter. And they said, well, those things are too hard, so we're not going to include it. Well, you should at least say we don't understand these things. And I can't remember what else I reviewed. But yeah, once I saw that my comments were completely ignored, I said, okay, no, I'm not having anything to do with the IPCC.
That's a pretty common way to look at it, isn't it? I've had other people say similar things, that comments are ignored. It's not worth my time anymore.
Yeah.
All right.
Not only that, but something more profound. I realized is I didn't want to lend my name to a document that I didn't agree with 100%. Okay, so I'm going to do things solo. I don't sign petitions. I don't participate in group assessments. I don't do anything like that. I'm not going to lend my name to something that I don't agree with 100%. And all these assessment documents, there's so many compromises and all this kind of stuff that no, I'm not going there. So I don't put my name on anything that I haven't written.
I have one big question to end with. I think my viewers would be interested in finding out what books or people or papers, et cetera, you find compelling or not compelling. You want to throw out any answers to that one?
Well, in terms of books that have been published recently, I mean, there have been some good ones, none of which I agree with 100%, but all making important points. I thought Bjorn Lomborg's False Alarm makes some very important points and is generally very informative. In a similar vein, but with a less academic approach, was Michael Schellenberger's book, Apocalypse Never. Steve Koonen's book, I think, is good. He talks about the science in a reasonable way. The second half of the book, when he talks about policy and stuff like that, I thought was much weaker. Policy and politics, I thought that was much weaker. I like Vaclav Smil's book. I thought that was very good, How the World Really Works. It was, I thought, very informative. Alex Epstein's book, The Fossil Fuel, he makes some very good arguments, but he's too attached to fossil fuels. I mean, I get we need abundant, reliable, cheap energy, but there could be other options, rather than just saying there's one option, fossil fuels. I like books by a single author because much more so than assessment reports and these group consensus, they're intellectual mishmashes. They're meaningless. I like the single authored thinking and how they frame it and how they approach and how they argument. To me, that's a real contribution, far more so than these mushy assessment reports on my blog. I'll mention Tim Palmer's book, The Primacy of Doubt, which is quite interesting. Not a heck of a lot of climate stuff in there, and the climate stuff that's in there people may not like, but in a broader sense, I think it's quite a good book. There's another book out there, Escape from Model Land by Erica Thompson. This is a very interesting subject. It's not the easiest, smoothest read, if you will. That's another cool book. Javier Vinos has written a book on climate past, present, and future, which is a very provocative read, which I think your audience would like very much. Marcia Wyatt is working on a book, which I understand she has 2 more chapters to go, which I haven't seen yet, but I would expect this to be a very, very good book. So, like I said, I like books. Individual journal articles are useful, but they tend to be very narrow. It's these sort of integral synthesizing things by a single author that I am most appreciative of.
Okay, very good. Any other points you'd like to make before we go ahead and wrap up?
Oh, I can't think of anything.
Okay. All right. I think we're good then. Thank you very much for your time. I enjoyed this, and I think the audience will love it.
Okay. Well, thank you. This was good.
All right. We'll talk to you next time. Judith Curry. Thank you.